You're probably all familiar with the Bob Jones column that was published in February by the NBR. One of our contributors wrote an article defending satire and free speech, humorously suggesting that Bob Jones be made the comedy commissioner. Of course, there were plenty of people upset by Sir Bob's Maori Gratitude Day, that 70,000 crazy people signed a petition and presented it to Parliament. They were that offended by the punchline of a joke that was grounded in fact. I'd like to take a little look at the Press Council complaint and ruling that was made. You will see it was not upheld with dissent on a 7-4 ruling. But the majority decision is not a positive one. Let's take a look at two of their closing statements before looking at the minority dissent. The column made the claim that there are no full-blooded Maori, and if it had not been for immigrants, there would be no Maori alive today. These contentions are ill-founded statements that are clearly not to be taken seriously, and the column was mean, malicious, and infantile. It is not surprising that the item drew an angry response. Actually, that's not quite what he said. He said there would be no Maori, or the Maori would not be who they are today, if not for their European ancestors. If your ancestors did not exist, then you don't exist. That's the first rule of time travel. Everyone knows that. And they go on to say, we note the column was subsequently pulled from NBR's website and that it will no longer be publishing Sir Bob's columns. We consider this an appropriate response to the justified public outrage at the item. So basically they're saying, if you get fired, then there's no need for us to censor you. Lovely. And now we move on to the minority dissent. The 4 members would have upheld the complaint, believing it clearly exceeded a reasonable boundary of free speech on the subject of race. The writer appeared to be straining for a reason to suggest Maori should grovel in gratitude to non-Maori for their survival, a suggestion the 4 members found offensive. So they skipped the joke, they went straight to the punchline, and they got offended. And they also claim that he says things that he didn't say. I mean, I hate to have to explain the joke, but the groveling implied was using fellow New Zealanders as a proxy for their own European ancestors. That's how satire works. And we've got a few more statements here. For instance, they say that this was an example of free speech being used for no purpose beyond cruel amusement. Again, I'm pretty sure that's just the definition of satire. Cruel amusement, satire, same thing. And lastly, they say that there is a useful principle that free speech on the subject of race ought to stop short of humor that deliberately sets out to hurt. And this is basically European-style hate speech laws that they are suggesting here, which means if somebody gets offended by something that you say, then you should be censored. Of course, you don't have free speech anymore when you have hate speech. Now, the only thing in this whole proceeding that was mean, malicious, and infantile was the complaint to the Press Council and the ruling they made.